Nintendo is well known for their video game consoles. That's literally all they've made. The NES was the first of its kind to release in Japan back in 1983 and will forever hold its place in video game history. So why not? Let's take a look at the history, development, and legacy of the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Nintendo started in Kyoto, Japan as a playing card company with the original name of Nintendo Kobai. Created by Fusahiro Yamauchi in 1889, Nintendo was making Hanafuda playing cards as their first market to experiment on, as Japan had banned forms of gambling in 1882. Japan's law did tolerate Hanafuda though. People did make workarounds to use Hanafuda cards as some form of gambling, like assigning numbers to certain cards, but needless to say, Nintendo did really well with their playing card business. Hanafuda cards translate to flower cards, which makes sense because most of these cards have nature-inspired design, my favorite being this bird design. Hanafuda cards are still occasionally mentioned in many Nintendo games and merchandise, like in Super Mario Maker or the Super Mario / Nintendo IP's designed Hanafuda playing cards for Club Nintendo. Nintendo did go through different business changes, name changes, and logos, but their most important was through the toy business. Nintendo had been making popular toys for Japanese households in the late 60s to early 70s. Disney licensed toys, cards and games, tabletop board games, the Ultra Hand, which later got a WiiWare game, and Love Tester.
Hi, I'm a Nintendo fan in the 1960s. I respect any relationship advice told to me by Luigi.
Their most important part, though, was through one task when making an accessory for Magnavox. Magnavox had introduced the first video game console in households everywhere, the Magnavox Odyssey, and Nintendo was tasked with making a light gun accessory for the console. The accessory would later become an idea in '85 for Nintendo's best product they've ever made, the Famicom. Released in 1983, the Famicom, short for Family Computer, was another video game console that had turned the tables around in the industry. While not being the first console in Nintendo's history, it's considered to make the first impact in the company's history and in the industry, especially in terms of expanding westward. The United States was already experiencing a crazy fall down of video games, and a lot of people were pretty much done with video games and had thought that these consoles would eventually die off when the next thing came around. But Nintendo revived the video game industry in 1985 when the localization of the Famicom came over and was renamed to the forever recognizable Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES was exactly as the Japanese Famicom, only that it was region suited for people here in the West. The cartridges themselves are twice as big compared to the Famicom cartridges in Japan. The games themselves looked really good from what was expected at the time. Take a look at this. This is definitely old school graphics. Most of the video game graphics back then were pretty much one-color stick figures. This looks like my effort in a geography class assignment. Now these are stellar graphics, something that I could get behind. Some of these games were, regardless, still limited. I mean, come on, the system can't make you breakfast. The 8-bit graphics were definitely a smart choice, and were a big step up from the other competitors. Sega, Atari, and Nintendo were the ones competing in the third generation of consoles in the 80s. Yes, Sega was competing with Nintendo before they brought out the Hedgehog. This is a good time to talk about the development of the NES. How did this chunky system come to be, and what did people think about it back then? So the president of Nintendo around that time wanted to make a system of people's dreams for the best in marketing and sales. Nintendo wanted to make a system that did more than just gaming. They wanted something that would be a household computer that would be disguised as a toy, expanding Nintendo's audience if it ever got popular with children. Nintendo's research and development department had questioned the president of Nintendo at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, whether to include a disk drive, modem, keyboard, that kind of stuff. He told them just to focus on simplicity and the system being affordable, which makes sense. Masayaki Yamura, the president of the second development team, had chosen cartridges as a format that wouldn't be complicated, and they designed cartridges to store 2,000 bytes of RAM onto the cartridges. When they wanted to go for a goal of the games, they had designed the games to be as close as possible to arcade games with their sprites, side-scrolling features, and more. I think it's safe to say that Nintendo was inspired by the ColecoVision, which was a console that had competed with Atari in the second generation. The chief manager for projecting the NES, Takao Sawano, brought a ColecoVision home to his family, and they were stunned.
Imagine your family being flabbergasted at the sight of a ColecoVision. What a time it was in the 1980s.
The ColecoVision pretty much set the bar for the Famicom, and Nintendo wanted to push that to its limits and match the more powerful Donkey Kong hardware. So they decided to take a whole Donkey Kong cabinet for analysis and got back the PPU chip for the NES. The Famicom design team originally wanted to use arcade-style joysticks for the system, even dismantling some from American game consoles to see how they worked, but ultimately settled on D-pads for the Famicom's controllers. The D-pads were actually taken apart from the Game & Watch handhelds that were made in 1980, which is Actually a pretty cool fact. They did make an add-on for an arcade-style joystick, however it was sold separate, which was the NES Advantage. The Famicom ended up releasing on July 15th, 1983 with 3 ports of Nintendo's arcade games, Donkey Kong, Popeye, and Donkey Kong Jr. They had to pretty much rely on their own first-party games first before getting licenses from other companies. Namco and Hudson Soft would later approach Nintendo in '84 to agree to produce ports and official third-party games.
Now, Nintendo looks like they're doing pretty well in Japan. When are we getting this shit in America?
Nintendo decided to now target the American market. They negotiated with Atari to release a redesigned Famicom, with Atari naming it as the Nintendo Advanced Video Gaming System.
Atari? You mean to tell me the same company that brought down the video game industry as low as it could go was helping Nintendo here?
What a time it was in the 80s. Atari and Nintendo set the deal and signed it at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in 1983. But at that same show, Atari found out that their competitor was illegally demonstrating their new Coleco Atom with Nintendo's Donkey Kong. It was a violation of their deal. It delayed Nintendo's marketing contacts with Atari, and Atari's CEO was fired the next month, so that deal went great! Nintendo decided to market the console themselves and threw concepts for a keyboard, audio cassette recording, and wireless joystick accessories out of the window. By 1985, Nintendo was already announcing plans to release the Famicom in North America as the Advanced Video Entertainment System, or AVES for short.
We're getting close to the final name.
The American video game press doubted Nintendo succeeding in the US, as the industry itself was still recovering from the depths of the video game crash of '83. Still though, Nintendo managed to gain popularity by showing off these Nintendo Versus arcade cabinets in '84. And because of how successful they were, it paved the way for Nintendo to release the NES. At CES in 1985, Nintendo unveiled the American version of the Famicom, a budget-friendly, stripped-down version of the AVS. They pretty much avoided the home computer idea at this point. Nintendo had designed the system to avoid terms with game consoles and marketed this thing as a toy. Game packs, calling the console a control deck, and marketed this thing as an entertainment system. Nintendo had now called this system the Nintendo Entertainment System, or finally, NES for short. The NES replaced the top-loading cartridge design of the original Famicom and AVS with a front-loading door that kept the cartridges out of view, kinda like a VCR. The Famicom's hardwired controllers were replaced with 2 7-pin sockets for the detachable wired controllers. Nintendo released 17 launch games selected from Famicom's library: Duck Hunt, Excite Bike, Wild Gunman, Kung Fu, Ice Climber, and the original Super Mario Bros. There was a rise for video games, and the American market was signing up for it without even knowing. Nintendo was really smart about this, and the fact that they weren't even calling this a video game system, rather an entertainment system, gives them more opportunity for their consoles to appear in children's toy stores. The Robotic Operating Buddy, or ROB for short, was part of the marketing plan to play the NES's tech as being more novel than other game systems, while also leaning towards the reach of the toy market as well. Peripherals like the NES Zapper Light Gun had also gotten attention and had shown better popularity across children that wanted this system. Now to console bundles. The NES was home to some pretty good console bundles: Deluxe, Action, Power, and Basic Set. The most infamous being the Action Set, and containing the console, 2 controllers, an NES Zapper, and a dual game pack containing Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. There was a redesign for the NES later on in 1993 that was released for North American, Australian, and Japanese markets, showing off a nicknamed Dogbone controller, which is cute, and the rest of the console being a top loader and terrifyingly only supporting RF video. The NES did well from 1985 to 1995 here in the US, but Nintendo had to discontinue making the system in 1995. It makes sense, technology for this stuff will go out in a decade, so it makes sense to... Oh no. Nintendo had supported the Famicom until discontinuing it in 2003. 2003 is a flabbergasting 20 years to support this system. The Famicom was still being supported until officially discontinuing customer support for repairs in 2007. The NES was just such a good system. Even though the games were simple and there's a lot of maintenance flaws and the problems the system had, it still doesn't change the fact that this system saved the video game industry. I personally have always been someone that has loved the NES library of games. When I was 7, I played the original Super Mario Bros. On an NES emulator as a kid, and I was hooked. Many other games I tried around that time, like Donkey Kong, Circus Charlie, the original Mega Man, and Mega Man 2, so many cool games that I've never seen before brought me to the retro gaming community, and it all started with the NES.
The NES Classic was my first true way of being able to play these games. It's possible that if Nintendo had manufactured more of these, we probably would have gotten a lot more people hooked onto these video games, rather than people just getting bootleg versions of these for their one-stop shop of Mario. That terrifies me. What were they thinking?